Thank you for watching the Shakaama live show. So, I am completely sick, so I'm gonna take it easy. For this video, I just want you to sit back and relax and listen. So, I just watched an hour-and-a-half long presentation given by a lady physician, and I mean physician as in PhD, talking about the reality of the black position in the United States. Now, I want to start off by saying just how incredulous it is that in the United States, we do have a position where you have white people in a position of power and you have black people in a position of subservience. You can call it second-class citizenry or whatever. Now, that's at the top levels. You have an infrastructure of white men mostly. And when I say white men, that includes Protestant, Christian, and Jews. They're all white. Do not be deceived. The Ashkenazi Jews are white people. They are Czechoslovakian, Yugoslavian, Russian, German. And they can trace their family history for tens of generations living in those areas. They never were Hebrews. So please do not leave in the comments that Jews aren't white. Jews today are white. We're not talking about the African Hebrews, so get that out of your mind. We have an infrastructure of white men who make it their business to ensure that white men remain in the position of power. I'm a Capricorn. I'm a libertarian. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm well-studied, well-versed, and well aware of what they are doing. And frankly, I don't care. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not going to go off the handle and get emotional about anything. So when I mention something, don't try and feel sorry for me. They sit in a position of power and they make it their business to remain in that position. Most of you white people listening to me now, and even the word white is something modern. White people never called themselves white until about 60 years ago. There were all sorts of names for black people, but there was no name for white people. It was about 100 years ago, in trying to codify scientifically why there is a disparity between black and white people, that they tried to then start to name what Europeans were, because they already had names for Africans. They needed a name for Europeans. So they came up with Caucasian, which is based in a completely racist, and when I say racist, I mean the dichotomy between people in power saying that they are better than their fellow man, being black men. Caucasian meaning that Europeans allegedly came from the Caucasus Mountains. And here's the ridiculousness of this. They were saying that white people came from the Caucasus Mountains, and then he described the Caucasus Mountains as being the cradle of civilization. So saying that white people came from the cradle of civilization. No, I'm not talking about the Tigris and Euphrates. I'm talking about the Caucasus Mountains, and that the Caucasus Mountains birthed this pure white race, and that they are therefore Caucasians. So the term is ridiculous, just all over the place, right? The entire theory is just bunk. But here is my point. You have these white people sitting in the positions of power trying to instill and ensure that you have this infrastructure of one set of skin tone people being superior to in all aspects. That is education, economics, healthcare, everything. And those are the real racist. Now, Jim Bob and T-Bone, who live down in the sticks, calling their neighbors, who also live in the sticks, but happen to be black, and calling them the N-word or all sorts of stuff, calling them monkeys and what have you. They are simply acting out what the people in power have already set up, this infrastructure where the common white man is against the common black man. And I was struck by the lady physician when she said that while of course there is no difference between white and black, I mean, we're all human. They finally came out after all of these stupid books like Black Like Me and The White Man's Burden and all that stupid stuff, that an actual research was done, and the researcher said there's absolutely no difference, none whatsoever, between white people and black people. She said, while that is true, I'm not going to tell my daughter that just go out and frolic in the fields holding hands with white people, because the reality is you still have Jim Bob and T-Bone that exist. They really do exist. And you still have Winston Thurston Howard III sitting in some sort of board somewhere who says, let's put our toxic product in the ghetto, make sure that gets to the ghetto, and charge them for it. Those people exist in the world. I said I'm a libertarian and a Capricorn to say that I'm a realist, I'm a pragmatist. And so is she, so is the physician. She said, instead of teaching my daughter to go frolic in the fields holding hands with white people, she's going to teach her about the realities of this world. The videos that I do for black people are talking about the realities of this world. I'm not talking about holding hands with white people frolicking in the fields. While there are some white people that black people can actually hold hands, frolic in the fields, smell the flowers, and all that sort of jazz, Tebow and Jim Bob exist. And Winston Thurston Howard III exists. When I go to an audition and they say, ooh, you're too exotic, that exists. That's a reality. When I go to an office and say, oh, ooh, sorry, we just hired 20 positions in the last 5 minutes that I talked to you and told you to come in for an interview. That exists. That really does exist. So I don't want black people nor white people to be ignorant of that. A lot of my speeches for black people is so that everybody can understand. Here's the thing about racism. And I'm talking about real racism. I'm not talking about Jim Bob and Tebow calling their neighbors the N-word. That's not racism. That's just bigotry and prejudice. You're the peon. Racism means that you are able to impact an entire group of people. That's either through legislation or through a concerted effort. So we don't want black people in this area. We're not going to rent to them, lease to them, or sell houses to them in this area. That's racism. Calling somebody the N-word is bigotry. Understand the terms. Now, for racism to survive, Jim Bob and Tebow have to exist. Have to. We have to have people on the front line that keeps black people, just like we send our military over to Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, what have you, and destabilize the area. We need Jim Bob and Tebow to destabilize black people on a daily basis. We need Jim Bob and Tebow to not rent to black people. We need Jim Bob and Tebow to not sell their house to black people. We need Jim Bob and Tebow to run black boys out of schools. We need Jim Bob and Tebow to make sure that we call little Kwame and tell him that he's ignorant and he's not going to amount to anything. Yeah, these are real, actual things that have happened in school, and I'm the teacher, and Tebow is the teacher. We need to get a Beyonce character on TV wearing blonde wigs, blonde weaves, and saying, look how pretty she is. We need to put her in commercials to make sure that black women think that you have to look like a white person to be considered beautiful, when in fact the complete most beautiful woman in the world to Europeans was actually an African statue that had a black woman carved out with big huge breasts, a big huge behind, big lips, It exudes sexuality, and Europeans knew that because their women do not have such features. But they can't let black women know that because black women would know their worth, right? This is why I rail against feminism in black women, because they don't understand what they're supporting. They're supporting their own destruction. But the crux of this video is that research that came out after all the stupid books that said there is actually no difference between blacks, Asians, whites, what have you. Now, on a genetic level, everybody else has Neanderthal or some other subhuman beastie creature in them that the white people or Asians or whatever commingled with. But for the most part, there's no difference between us. Now, let's get to talking about socializing. A lot of white people, because of the structure of racism, have it in their mind they have nothing in common with black people. That has to be the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. Why? Because black Americans, African Americans, Americanized Africans, I'm not talking about Africans who just came over on the boat. Americanized Africans have zero in common with anybody else on the planet other than white Americans. Black Americans have completely been socialized to identify with the white American standard of living, way of thinking, way of behaving. Now, you might be saying, but I have nothing in common with that woman that gets on the bus and she's loud and she's laughing and she's giggling. Sure you do. Sure you do. That's actually redneck behavior. And I've discussed this in more of my philosophical and historical videos. That's redneck behavior. That is complete redneck behavior. You can trace that to the redneck stock. And redneck is not an insult. It's an actual term that is over 500 years old. Yes, redneck is a term that is older than this country. Cracker, it's the same exact term as redneck. It is older than this country. It has nothing to do with whips being cracked on slaves' backs. Black people have been told that and they believed it. That's the wrong definition. Redneck and cracker are over 500 years old, and it describes the people from the areas outside of England. That means the Irish and the Scottish. Redneck, is it coming clear now? We're talking about the working class of Irish and the working class of Scottish. What does a white man do when he's in the field all day? How does he look? What does the back of his neck look like? It looks red because he's bent over doing something in the field, whether that's picking cotton or whatever, or shearing sheep or being a shepherd or whatever. And just as a side note, rednecks hated black people, not because they hated black people for having black skin, but they hated black people or black slaves because the black slaves took their work. So for the white supremacy power structure, racism power structure, it was easy to implement that onto rednecks and crackers, because they already hated black slaves. Yes, I'm being serious. The rednecks and crackers hated black people because they took their work. That's the only skills that they had. They weren't lawyers. They weren't doctors. They weren't accountants, right? Who were the accountants? Jewish people, as coming from over there, they made jewelry, which has the term Jew in it, and they were accountants. That's who were accountants. Rednecks and crackers as a people were not accountants. They were field workers. They were field hands. They were livestock people. And they came over to America seeking freedom and seeking the ability to work and not starve, right? You know about that history. And instead, they found the slaves had taken all of those positions. They despised slaves and they despised slavery, but they were in this infrastructure where slavery was legal. So they lived a very poor life, worse than slaves a lot of time. Because at the end of the day, the slave actually has to eat and is fed and is taken care of in some sort of way. Yes, rednecks don't get raped on a nightly basis like slaves did, but rednecks also starved, and they didn't have any tools but they had little tiny gardens, and that's how they fed themselves. You need Tebow, Jim Bob, you need Beyonce to keep the structure going on. But for white Americans, black Americans are literally your brothers. There's no other term for it. Black people watched The Three Stooges, Gunsmoke, I Love Lucy, The Waltons, the Kennedy assassination, the Watergate trials. While you're saying you have nothing in common with black people, they're socialized into American pop culture and American culture just as much as you are, if not even more. Black people actually consume more television, more internet than white people. And with the advent of this rap and hip hop, or whatever it's called, whatever it wants to be called, it's actually white people who are the largest consumers of that. So not only do white people know white culture more, they know black culture more. Black people in the United States do not identify culturally with anybody else on the planet other than white Americans. Now, that means you don't have an excuse of not going up to a black guy in a party, at college. I went to a lot of boarding schools, private schools, prep schools, and I had white guys say that to me, and I was all like, what are you talking about? I know white culture more than I know anything else. In fact, I could probably hold a conversation with your father at length, more so than I could hold it with you as a teenager. Now, that's at my level. Even at the street level, I see white people day in and day out who you could literally mistake them for being black. Literally. Not figuratively, not on some sort of surface level. I mean literally. And you have to check if they're really white. And I'm not talking about people who put on do-rags. I'm talking about people who just have that whole aura about them. They have their head shaved. Because, black people come in all colors. You really sometimes have to look at those white people and go, is that a light-skinned black guy? And that's just proof of what I'm saying. You cannot tell the difference sometimes. And it's a white guy acting quote-unquote black, but all it means is black guys act quote-unquote white. They said that America is a melting pot. And it has melted black people into white people and white people into black people. But the mainstream media and Winston Thurston Billy Goat III has spent billions making sure that you see that all the time. There's a big, huge difference between black people and white people. It's so different. Look, the black people burned their town. When in actuality, some other group was sent in that was actually paid millions of dollars to send in and burn down the town. Oh, that happens, yes. And it happens a lot. What is it called? Not secret agents, but agent provocateur. Oh, those black people threw Molotov cocktails at the Federal Building. When's the last time you saw a black person even make a Molotov cocktail? Black people aren't about bombing things. When they finally caught the Washington shooter and found that he was black, what did it turn out to be? He was a foreign black person. He wasn't Kwame around the corner. He wasn't Tyrone around the corner. He was Mustafa Ali Muhammad Jamal, one of those people. And I guess that's the problem with the mainstream media. They whitewash everything so that the Muslims seem to be white people exclusively 100%. And I'm using that term loosely now. Arabs are whiter than white people. Iraqis. I mean, all it is Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, Turkish people, blue eyes, green eyes, hazel eyes. They're not black people by any stretch of the imagination. But the mainstream media keeps you intent on making sure that there is some difference between white and black people. Now, in my videos, I'm not trying to promote the difference. I'm trying to promote the equality. So I say, black people, do this and you will be equal. I don't say, and you will be equal. I simply say, do this. Buy gold coins. Buy silver coins. There's a disparity in wealth between black and white people. I'm telling you how to decrease that wealth gap. I would hope I don't have to come out and say, I am doing this so that you will be equal in education, in wealth, in economics. You know, when they grab these people and you look around and they're a superstar, for the person in question, a lot of times they're just doing what they did when they were at home, and somebody is directing them. This is how you sing. Come over here, we're gonna do this dance routine. And lo and behold, you have a Justin Bieber. Lo and behold, you have a Miley Cyrus. Lo and behold, you have a Beyonce. They're just told what to do. So I'm telling black people what to do. You want to get back at a white man for shooting your child? This is how you do it. You go get a lawyer. I mean, it's just a matter of fact. There are some disparities in the black community and the white community, but those are artificial. What do I mean by that? Those are made, man-made. There is an actual effort to make that happen. There's an entire industry to capture black men, put them in prison, and have them work for free. Now, if you don't understand that the end goal is to have black men work for free, and you think this is about some sort of crime, then I can't ever convince you of the reality of what's going on. And you have white people saying this is a white thing. But the thing is, the person making that, or the people making those statements, trying to set themselves apart from black people, are normally middle-class people. Of course, you're not going to understand what's going on. Most Americans don't know the social experiments that go on daily. You, in the United States, you have to force poor people to remain poor. You have to force it. Why? America is built on exceptionalism, innovation, forward thinking, breaking apart problems. I'm poor. How do I break apart this problem? Okay, I'm going to execute that. Now I'm no longer poor. The banks and the government keep structuring and restructuring and restructuring and to force poor people to remain poor. Why is there a disappearing middle class? Because the government and the banks are against all of us. Not just black, not just white, all of us. I wanted to do a video specifically on that, these social experiments, and show you how they're doing what they're doing. That you come out with bigoted people, I don't even care about that. People saying the N-word, I don't care about that. And I made videos on this is how you deal with this. If you have the Jim Cramer actor guy say nigger 20 times, and he's not kidding, he's not telling a joke, this is how you handle it. You handle it economically. You ruin the person. You don't beat him up. If you beat him up, then you're in trouble. Then the police are going to go, we got another slave to put into the prison system to work for free. It's all orchestrated. Bankers, government, Wall Street. Do you know that they just uncovered a slave cemetery on Wall Street? I've told you people that slavery was in the North. It wasn't in the South. The South simply had the farms for the slaves to work on. Slavery was a United States thing. You bought and sold slaves on Wall Street. We have people who are now figuring out their family history, and they're figuring out that great-granddad wasn't such a nice guy, and he didn't make his millions by selling chocolate donuts to kids. He made his millions by owning slaves, trading slaves, buying and selling slaves, and they can trace their family wealth to slavery. I said a long time ago, if you don't want to give black people reparations, then why don't you simply investigate all of the families that dealt with slavery and simply find those families the millions of dollars that they have and give it to black people? Do you want justice or do you want justice? And that was the point of the lady physician's speech. There was no healing. She was a psychiatrist, psychologist. There was no healing. She had like 5 different PhD degrees. There was no healing. There was no setting right. When they interned the Japanese during World War II, afterwards, they tried to set it right. So they gave Japanese people reparations. When they did something in Guam to the Guamean people, afterwards, they set it right. They gave the Guameans thousands of dollars each. You can't have rampant slavery and then say, okay, we're done with slavery, and still have laws on the book that say you cannot educate black people. You cannot marry black people. Black people cannot be in the city after 5 p.m. And then 100 years later, ask, why are these black people in such bad shape? You know why they're in bad shape. Their great-grandfather couldn't read, wasn't allowed to read. And here is a point that the lady physician made. You cook spaghetti. Where did you learn to cook spaghetti? And how come your spaghetti is different from her spaghetti? Oh, your mom taught it to you? Your dad taught it to you? Your grandmother taught it to you? She said 90% of education comes from the home. So if great-grandfather, father didn't know anything, couldn't teach their sons anything, what is son going to learn? Nothing. When the ban on educating black people was lifted, black people made it a concerted effort that the lower generation would get educated. And black people went from completely illiterate, I don't mean just can't read, I mean literally doesn't understand laws, doesn't understand anything, nothing. I don't think you understand the level of illiteracy that I'm talking about, that it was against the law to teach black people anything. When that ban was lifted, they made sure the lower generation learned everything. And in 40 years, black people went from zero education, zero literacy, zero understanding of laws to being full-fledged citizens. And this is why the KKK was formed. That's how that came about. When the laws finally were against quote-unquote white people, they simply rebelled. And that was, of course, the Democrats that did that. Then they came up with laws. You can't live in this area. You can't go to school in this area. You can't do this in this area. No hospital will serve a black person. No fire person will go help a black person. No policeman will go help a black person. No, these were laws. There are still on the books of some states these laws till today. They have not been repealed. They're not enforced, but you can go check the various states to see if there's any black codes. That's what they're called, the black codes. So when you wonder why are black people in the position that they are, there were laws against black people. Laws. I'm not talking about white people just were disgusted by black people. There were laws. You can't then turn around without any sort of reparation, and you have the communist Dr. King come along and say, oh, we just need to hold hands with white people. No, you need to repair the damage, the ongoing damage, the continued prison slavery, continued. I have said over and over and over, 75% of black people in jail now are there for simple marijuana possession. Simple, meaning they were arrested for having a cigarette, no more than 2 on them, meaning they did not have enough marijuana that you would consider it for distribution or resale. Simple marijuana possession. You wouldn't want me as president. I'd empty all of the jails and shut them down, and I'd say, okay, we're going to instead have hospitals with psychiatrists and psychologists on staff, and we are going to quote unquote re-educate people. I went to a site that talked about rape in depth and the psychology of rape. You are told in the mainstream media that once a rapist, always a rapist, and they cannot help themselves and blah, 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 blah. About 50% of quote unquote rapists do it only once, never to repeat it again. Where do they get this from? They get this from non-revealing, meaning psychiatrists who don't give out the names, dates, and what have you, who their clientele was. I raped somebody, one person, 15 years ago. That's where they get that from. You know, the medical community and psychiatrists are part of the medical community. The medical community does, in fact, share information with each other. And they have a completely debunked rape information stats. Now, the feminists have gotten a hold of it. So a lot of the stuff is pro-feminist and anti-male, but for the psychology of it, it's all straight psychology, psychiatry. And they say, here's the myth that a rapist cannot be re-educated. I'm using that word wrongly. And they said, nope, that is a myth. A rapist can, in fact, be re-educated. Well, let's move on. Can a murderer be re-educated? Oh, yes. Christianity has proven that. You have plenty of murderers who go into a church, repent, give their lives over to Christ, and become the preacher and never murder anybody ever again. We have people in the country who committed a crime of passion. They didn't go out and kill random people. They killed their wife and her lover that they caught in the act. You have people who have shot police or intruders who came into their house at night, in the middle of the night, and they're in jail. Why are they in jail? Because they want to throw somebody in jail. There's no justice served there. The person invaded their house and the homeowner reacted. How a homeowner should react. You have a lot of people in jail simply there to make sure that they do the whole slave thing. And there's no rehabilitation going on. We are turning out people out of jail who are worse than they got in. And you know what? The bankers and the government doesn't care. Black people are violent. Nope. 75% of black people are there for simple marijuana possession. The violent criminals are mostly white. White people in jail are there for violent, sadistic, crazy, insane crimes. They don't throw white people in jail for simple marijuana possession. It just doesn't happen. The mass murderers, the serial rapists, the pedophiles, anything that you can think of ugly, that's what white people are in jail for. Black people aren't in jail for that. And it's an impossibility that black people commit more crimes than white people. It's an impossibility. You're talking about a percentage of black people. And black people are a percentage, a tiny percentage of the U.S. population. I know you probably walk down the street and you see 5 black people, but there's probably 20 black people in the entire city and out of 800,000. It's only this whole structure that keeps promoting different. Black people are different. Black people think like white Americans. White Americans think like black Americans. We all think the same. There is a concerted effort to demonize black people. I want everybody listening to wake up to that, to understand what is going on. Look deeper. Black and white, there is no difference. There's no difference physiologically or anything else. But there are people in power that are targeting black people to demonize us. And if you can't wrap your head around that, I really don't have words for you other than some sort of insulting thing to question your intelligence. Have you ever seen a news report that you know was false, and then you look around and everybody's saying, yeah, get him. I want you to take that experience and apply that to black people. That is what's going on. I would love nothing more than black people and white people to run through the fields holding hands, singing Kumbaya, but only if they could run through the fields and holding hands, singing Kumbaya. And there's just people now, right now, who refused to do that. And until those people leave, I'm going to train my black people how to be equal. Not better, equal. Buy gold coins. Buy silver coins, buy real estate. If you're going to go to college, get an engineering degree. Don't go into debt to go to college. Go your first 2 years to a community school, community college school. Stay there for those years and then pay in-state into a top 500 school and get a engineering degree. That is my channel in a nutshell. Thank you for watching the Shakaama Live Show.